It looks like an ordinary gas station from the outside, but inside, there's an unknown boss, two young people in danger, and the shadow of a dark plan hanging over everything. Are you ready to watch who will survive the clash of fear and courage tonight? Don't forget to like and subscribe for more stories like this. Your support means everything. Thank you. The cool evening air spread a soft hum around the station. Aside from the occasional sound of cars pulling up to the fuel pumps, the place was almost silent. Inside, the man named Michael Harris, standing behind the counter, looked like just another night worker from the outside. But he held a secret no one knew. He was the real owner of this gas station. For the past few weeks, he had been disguised as a part-time employee, blending in to better observe the staff and customers. Being on the ground allowed him to see the station's real problems and understand what his team was dealing with. But tonight, there was a different kind of unease gnawing at Michael. Recently, fuel theft and small-scale vandalism had been increasing around town. The loosened lock on the door, spray paint quickly thrown on the back wall. All these little signs pointed to the station potentially being a target as well. At that moment, the door swung open, and two young men entered. Ethan was tall and slender, while Dylan was shorter and stockier. At first glance, they seemed like typical high school kids, but Michael immediately sensed their nervous energy. They moved quickly between the shelves, looking for something, but what they were really paying attention to was the door. They kept glancing around, as if ready to flee at any moment. Michael, trying not to draw attention, made his way to the register, pretending to organize the receipts in his hand. Listening closely, even though they were whispering, he could feel the tension in their words. As Michael shuffled through the receipts, he continued to watch the young men out of the corner of his eye. Ethan and Dylan whispered something to each other in hushed tones, occasionally glancing out the door. Michael's unease grew stronger. There was something off about these kids. Ever since they walked in, a sense of discomfort had spread through the station, something that felt far from pleasant. The boys quickly moved between the shelves, drawing closer to Michael for a moment. He kept counting the receipts, pretending to focus on the task, but his attention was fully on them. Ethan briefly made eye contact, but there was anxiety in his eyes. Dylan's gaze was even more intense. He was so focused that Michael could feel him tracking every move he made. Suddenly, Ethan started walking toward the register. Michael noticed the sound of his approaching steps and instinctively wondered what he should do. He got the impression that the young man was about to pull something out of his pocket. Maybe tonight, the unease Michael had felt would turn out to be a real threat. But then, out of nowhere, Dylan sharply touched Ethan's shoulder and spoke in a low voice. "Wait, don't rush. We need to hold off." Ethan, eyes cast down, stepped back, and both of them turned toward the door, stepping out of the station. Michael, still unsure if he'd made the right move, continued to watch them leave. A few moments passed after the boys left, but Michael still couldn't shake the uneasiness gnawing at him. Though it was hard to know what they would do in the darkness outside, his instincts told him something was about to happen. As time passed, the town would grow even stranger with the first light of morning. Michael felt his unease not just because of the boys, but also because his town was increasingly being known for thefts and crimes. For him, this wasn't just a gas station, it was a battleground, one where he was fighting something much bigger. "If we don't pull this off, it's over," Ethan said, his voice filled with deep worry. "Do you get it? If the theft is this big, everyone will recognize us, and things will spiral out of control." Dylan brought his finger to his lips, silently scanning the surroundings. "All we need to do is wait for the right moment," he said. "The rest, we'll handle it." As Michael watched the expressions on the faces of the two boys, now partially illuminated by the darkness, he felt his heart rate quicken. This wasn't some silly prank or a childish game. This was part of a serious plan. The tension and fear in their voices made it clear. Whatever was happening was dangerous. Ethan paused for a moment, his eyes fixed on something in the darkness of the park. "Something's wrong here. If we get caught, we'll make everything a lot harder. We need to move now." Michael decided to take a step closer. Slowly, but carefully, he emerged from behind the tree and moved quietly forward. He was planning each step meticulously, determined not to lose sight of the boys. He wasn't going to approach them with noise, but like a shadow, moving swiftly to close the gap between them. After a while, without noticing Michael's careful steps, Ethan and Dylan continued their conversation. "When do we start?" Dylan asked, furrowing his brow. If we can get through tonight, everything changes tomorrow. The station's coming for us, and no one will know what hit them. Ethan nodded, his eyes cast down as he thought for a moment. We don't have another choice. We have to do this, or we won't save anyone. Michael could only hear their voices through the dark silhouettes they cast. It was clear something dangerous was at play, but what exactly was the threat? Theft? Something more? He realized everything was far more complicated than it seemed, but somehow, he had to uncover the truth behind it all. Eventually, the boys fell silent. Michael noticed they were beginning to move. That meant it was time for him to act. Slowly and carefully, he withdrew and continued following them. Tonight, Michael had realized that there could be a threat not only to the town, but to the station itself. And this threat wasn't just about theft. After Rick's truck drove off, Michael took a deep breath. His anger, mixed with a desire to protect the townspeople and the sadness he felt for the kids being pushed into this danger, became a tangled mess inside him. These kids weren't criminals. They were frightened, desperate to do something because they felt they had no choice. Unfortunately, the ones who had pushed them into this situation showed no hesitation, not for a single second, as they put the kids in harm's way. Michael had quietly hidden among the trees along the edge of the park, still keeping a watchful eye on everything around him. Ethan and Dylan, trying to push aside their fear and tension, began walking through the dark streets. Though they kept their heads low, trying to seem casual, the reality of everything getting worse seemed unavoidable. This wasn't just a simple crime. Rick's orders were part of a dangerous and ruthless plan. If something went wrong, it wouldn't just be the kids in trouble, it could drag the entire town into a catastrophe. Michael made the decision to follow them. The boys didn't notice him, but he stayed careful, making sure he remained at a close enough distance. They didn't look back. Fear had completely engulfed them, and with every step, they grew more nervous. As they walked through the dark streets, they occasionally glanced around, but none of them were searching for a threat. Their fear had blinded them, but Michael's eyes never left them. After a while, they reached the gas station they had passed earlier. Ethan, his hands trembling, seemed to be in some kind of inner battle, unsure of what to do next. Dylan, on the other hand, was more determined, though his voice still carried a heavy fear. "Come on, what are we doing now?" he whispered. Ethan's response came in a voice full of tension. "We have to do it. Rick's waiting, you know that." At that moment, Michael made a quick decision to move closer. Swiftly, but carefully, he hid behind the corner of a building. As Ethan and Dylan passed by, he held his breath, trying to see what they were planning. When would they make their move? Michael's anger and fear clashed within him. If they succeeded, they wouldn't just be risking their own lives. They'd be putting the entire town in danger. Slipping his hands into his pockets, Michael continued to watch them. If a mistake was made tonight, it was only a matter of time before everything would explode. And when that happened, the town would be shaken, not only by the mistake of two kids, but by the dark force that had led them down this treacherous path. As Michael pressed the keys on his phone with force, he realized that the danger surrounding the townspeople was far greater than he had originally understood. Rick and his crew had infiltrated the town so deeply that they had reached a point where their secrecy couldn't be maintained for much longer. This wasn't just a small crime incident. The town was slowly being overtaken by a criminal gang. Behind everything that was happening, there was a larger plan, and trying to solve it alone would only complicate things further. The calm and rational voice of James on the other end of the line brought Michael a small sense of relief. "This can't be solved with small steps, Michael. Rick's circle has expanded. It's impossible to keep this under wraps much longer. If the police don't get involved right now, it might be too late." Michael took a deep breath. James was right. If everything escalated further, the town, including the station, would experience the worst of what was coming. But there was still something that could be done to protect the kids and the townspeople. Even if things fell into place, Rick's presence as a threat would always open the door to further incidents. "You're right, James," Michael replied, his voice sounding more determined. "We need to do something, but we have to protect the kids. We need to find Rick, the one who set this trap." After a short silence, James spoke again. "If the police get involved, things could be solved faster. I'll stay in touch with you on this. Be extra careful tonight, Michael. Rick sees you and everyone around you as a threat. This isn't just a game." Before hanging up, Michael pushed his lingering worry aside, focusing on gathering his thoughts. James' warning was accurate. Now, he needed to follow every step of the town carefully. The station, the kids, Rick, and the criminal gang. Everything was interconnected. If they didn't act in time, it wouldn't just put his life at risk, it could endanger the entire town. He hung up and reviewed the security cameras once again. There was still no concrete evidence of how Ethan and Dylan were connected to Rick's men, but one thing was clear. Surviving this night would be a major test for the whole town. Ethan and Dylan exchanged a brief look, silently debating what to do next. Ethan's eyes darted around, trying to avoid Michael's gaze, while Dylan clutched his bag tightly, still trembling. Both of them were filled with fear, but there was also a sense of guilt. It wasn't easy for them to look Michael in the eye because they knew that what they were doing tonight was a huge threat to the safety of the town. Dylan took a deep breath before speaking in a hushed voice, never looking away from Michael. "Rick threatened us," he said. "But if we don't do it, everything's going to get worse. That guy, he's dangerous." Michael took a slow step forward, getting a little closer to the two of them. "Why are you doing this?" he asked softly. "If Rick's orders are this dangerous and wrong, we should stand together and resist him. You're risking your lives, and you're putting the whole town in danger." Ethan tried to hide his fear, but his voice cracked as he spoke. "But he's so dangerous for us," he whispered. "If we go against him, he'll find us, and no one will help us." His voice shook, yet there was an unmistakable hesitation in his words. Michael could feel the fear and desperation inside them, and he could see how much power Rick had over them. But that didn't excuse their involvement in something wrong. "Rick will do anything to instill fear in you. But fear won't get you anywhere," he said calmly. "If you choose to help, I'll help you in return. But if you make a mistake, things might get out of control. Do you understand?" Dylan, avoiding Michael's gaze, focused on the ground for a moment. Ethan, on the other hand, seemed to find a bit more courage. "We have to do it," he whispered. "But maybe there's another way for us." Michael took a deep breath and said, "There is a way, but it requires you to choose the right path." He paused, his voice firm but reassuring. "If you still want to do what's right, trust me now, and let's get through this night together. I don't want to hurt this town. Our safety is what matters most." For a moment, Dylan and Ethan were silent, but then they slowly nodded and took a step toward Michael. The fear inside them seemed to lessen, even if just a little. "What should we do?" they asked in unison. Seeing their hesitation, Michael responded, "Let's move quickly to secure things. Let's solve this together. We can't let things get too late." In that moment, Michael felt the storm inside him settle a bit. Helping the kids find the right path might be the first step in stopping the big danger that was coming to the town. Though Ethan and Dylan didn't fully trust Michael's words, they realized they had no other choice. Their fear and anxiety mixed with the trust they had in him. Michael wanted to help them no matter what, but the uncertainty of what would actually happen that night was overwhelming. Rick and his men seemed to have control of the town, but tonight, everything could change if Michael could protect them. When Rick's SUV pulled into the station, the headlights blindingly lit up the dark night. Michael quickly made up his mind. "Hide," he whispered again, this time with more urgency. Ethan and Dylan hesitated for a moment, but they didn't ignore Michael's warning. They swiftly moved toward the office, sensing Rick was approaching. Michael took a deep breath, his eyes fixed on the movement of the SUV. Rick's arrival signaled that the threat was about to escalate. Michael couldn't allow the kids to get involved any further. When Rick's men stepped into the station, everything had reached a critical point. The doors of the SUV opened, and Rick, holding a phone, walked toward the station. Behind him were two more men, those same intimidating faces Michael had noticed earlier, roaming the streets of the town. Michael watched their movements closely while quickly shutting the office door behind him. He glanced around. No one was in sight, but his heart began to race again. Tonight could be the turning point for everything. Rick and his men began entering the station. Michael decided to act before they could spot him. He moved swiftly but carefully, shutting the office door behind him, and peered through the window to keep an eye on the station. If they could deal with things tonight, the town's dark side would take a step back. But at the end of it all, not just Michael, but the whole town would be facing a major threat. Michael paused for a moment. His next move was crucial. "Hide," he whispered again. "Stay down, no matter what." Then, with his hands sweating and his eyes gleaming in the darkness, He waited for Rick's next steps. When Rick realized that the police had surrounded the area, a look of desperation crossed his face. This wasn't the moment he had been waiting for. He was so arrogant that while challenging Michael, he wasn't aware he was sealing his own fate. His words hung in the air, full of anger, but now he understood that his crimes were about to be exposed, and the dark deeds he'd committed in the town were coming to an end. Michael took a deep breath, watching the police draw their weapons. His eyes were filled with determination. Tonight wasn't just about saving a gas station, it was about saving the future of the whole town. Rick's plan could have led to disaster just a few steps away, but luck had been on their side, and the right move had been made at the right time. As James stepped forward beside the officers, he smiled at Michael. "See, it wasn't a hero story," he whispered. Michael nodded with a grin. "The story was right, though. We had to win tonight." As the police cuffed Rick and his men, Michael watched the device closely. When the state police began carefully dismantling and analyzing it, Michael felt his unease start to fade. This wasn't just a theft operation. It was the beginning of a much bigger threat to the Town A drug and smuggling ring. Rick's men were just pawns. Now, the chain was beginning to unravel. Ethan and Dylan were peering out the office window, watching the events unfold. When Michael noticed them, both had looks of shock in their eyes, but there was also a sense of relief. It was as if the entire town had suddenly been freed from its fears. Rick shot one last glance at Michael, gritting his teeth. "This is just the beginning," he shouted, but the threat in his voice had lost all its power. "I'll bring an end to all of you. All of you." As the police placed Rick and his men into the car, Michael stepped back. Tonight was a pivotal moment for the town. Rick and his criminal organization had received a heavy blow, but Michael knew the remaining dangers wouldn't be forgotten. He would continue to protect the town's peace. This was the right decision for the town, Michael thought to himself, his resolve growing stronger. He would remember this night not just as a victory, but as the beginning of the town's return to safety. When Ethan and Dylan heard Michael's words, there was an initial silence, a mixture of surprise and relief. They stared at each other for a moment, as if struggling to believe what he had said. Then, slowly, they smiled, and Ethan, tilting his head, said, "You really did so much for us. We can't thank you enough," his voice still trembling slightly, but now filled with a sense of trust that replaced the fear from before. Dylan added, "Yeah, everything happened so fast. But when you're in the middle of such a huge danger, we didn't really know how to get out," he said, looking visibly more relaxed. "Going back to normal life, after living in fear for so long, it feels like we're being born again." Michael smiled and nodded. "Everyone deserves a chance, kids. What you did with that chance is what matters. You need to stay a bit more careful, but this town will be able to trust you again." Ethan nodded, adding, "Really, it wasn't as scary as we thought. We succeeded because the right people stepped in at the right time," his tone now more confident. Michael smiled even more warmly. "Everything happened at the right time and in the right way. But what matters is that you know what you did and what you changed. You changed your lives and the town's safety. Now, starting to return to normal life will be the best decision for both you and those around you." Dylan, a bit more thoughtful, asked, "What about Rick's men? What if this isn't really over?" Michael's voice was more definite this time as he replied, "It's over. Rick's connections have been dismantled, and this is just the beginning. Anything dangerous for the town will slowly come to an end. But now, it's time for a new beginning for you. You're free now." The two young men sat in silence for a while. Then, looking at each other, asked, "Are we really free?" Michael smiled and said, "Yes. Now you can live your life. But this is just the first step. We took it together. And after this step, everything will get better." Ethan and Dylan looked at Michael with gratitude in their eyes. The trust that now filled their gaze had replaced the fear that was once there. And perhaps most importantly, they had found hope again. As Michael stepped outside, the morning sun slowly rose, and there was a palpable shift in the stillness surrounding the station. It was a new beginning, not just for the town, but also for Ethan and Dylan. The fact that the young men had broken free from their fears and regained their freedom had made a significant impact in their small town. In that moment, Michael couldn't help but reflect on how an ordinary gas station could host such a heroic story. Ethan and Dylan stood outside, looking at each other in the first light of the sun. In their eyes, there was both a sense of relief and a feeling of accomplishment. Everything had changed. The town, their lives, their safety. All of it had become a better place, thanks to Michael. This experience had deeply affected them, but most importantly, it marked a turning point in their lives. When Michael saw the young men's smiles, he felt a deep sense of satisfaction. Yes, this event had created a big change in a small town. But, as always, Michael would remember it as just another moment where he did his duty. To him, heroism was simply an inner drive to do the right thing, to make a meaningful and important difference. Then, with a gentle pat on their heads, he said, "All right, get back to normal life. You can work in any job you want or build your future here in the town. But remember, take the right steps." Ethan and Dylan murmured, "Thank you, Michael. We'll never forget this." As Michael reflected on everything that had happened, he thought to himself, what mattered was creating change in this town. After all, everything had a path. This town was now filled with a new chance. And maybe, true heroism was about changing someone else's life by taking the right steps with courage in defiance of fear. The story ended with a small gas station not just selling gas, but reigniting the hope that had once been lost. Don't forget to like and subscribe for more stories like this. Your support means everything. Thank you.